Okay, so we're looking at this Bach here, and we're thinking, all right, we're in the key of G, and I have these little blanks here. These blanks are just showing you the harmonic rhythm. I'm telling you where the chords are. And the process for you up to this point, right, has been, all right, cool. We'll just like look at everything vertically, right? And let's think about that. That's a chord. So how do we figure out what that harmony is? Right? Well, you figure out your little snowman, right? And this is a process in class I may have referred to as something called segmentation. I can't remember if this came up or not before break, but that's really what we're doing. We're segmenting the music. We're taking it apart and ripping it into little pieces. So the more general way to think about it, right, is, okay, let's just take everything that's in our harmonic rhythm and try to make a snowman out of it. So you have a G. We have another G. We have this principle in music called octave equivalency, which means that when we're thinking about vertical harmony, it doesn't matter that we have two Gs. We only care that we have one. So we have a G, and then we have, what else? A B, and we have a D, and we have an F sharp. Okay, so up to this point, what you would do, right, is you'd say, oh, cool, it's a one chord. There's an F sharp, it's a 1-7, and the F sharp is the lowest note, right? So that means this is not a 5. That means this is a 1-4-2, right? And honestly, you're not like totally wrong if you think that, and I think you can make an argument that that's the case. And this is what we'll hopefully in person be able to talk about more broadly, that 1-4-2 is not really wrong, because remember, you're in a class called music theory. You're not in a class that's like, it is an objective class, right? You're trying to learn right and wrong, but you're trying to build a language to talk about something, right? To talk about music, to explain why you think this is 1-4-2 and how that is different than another answer. And I know it's kind of vague and a broad thing, but it's like a really important musical theory concept that hopefully we'll get to talk about in person a little bit more. So up to this point, right, you probably would have written 1-4-2, and like you're not empirically wrong. However, I don't think that's what you're hearing. And that's really the gist of this, right? That we're trying to write down what we hear in music. Oops. We try to write down what we're hear in music using these like symbols and things like that. So what I think you guys hear when you look at this is that for sure this is a one chord, right? It looks like one. We're in the key of G. We start on 1. Great. However, if you listen to this, and even if, like, you guys can go and play this, just like pause the video and go play this at the piano. I'm sorry, I'm in my office at home. I don't have a piano with me, but you can go and play this, right? And listen to it. What you'll hear is that this definitely sounds like 1. However, this 8th note, this F sharp, does not sound as important as these other notes. It sounds like it is, to borrow a term, embellishing it, and it's creating something interesting, right? It's adding something that doesn't necessarily need to be there. In fact, if you just take this out, right, and you just had this, that looks a heck of a lot like what we've been doing so far, right? And say we go and take this one out. That looks a lot like what we've been doing, right? This is basically the homework you've been doing up to this point, right? Well, we're just moving towards what the actual music is, which is that note is there, but it's not as important. So how do we deal with it? Well, we call it a dissonance. And that specific note there is what we call a passing tone. And this, again, think of this like species counterpoint, right? This creates the passing motion. This is a dissonance. This was consonant. This is a dissonance. The dissonance must continue down by step, right? And there it is. Think about them like half notes, just like we did in our species counterpoint way back a couple months ago, right? That's a dissonance. The same process can be continued here. Let's look at all of these notes right there, right? So if you take all of those notes on beat 1, where I'm telling you there's a chord, what you're going to get is, well, there's a C, right? There's an E right there. There's a G right there. There's another E down here, right? But we have octave equivalency, which means like this E, for the purposes of the harmony, is just as important as that one, so you can use either one. And then there is an F sharp, okay? So there's an F sharp, right? So there is no way to make C, E, F sharp, G a snowman. It's not going to be a chord, quote unquote, right? It is a chord, but it's, you know, something else that we're not going to study at this point. So the easiest way to do this is, one, visually, just like take a look at that, right? Oops. Take a look at that. You're going to get this situation a lot when you're doing your homework and you're trying to figure out like what is the chord, right? Well, it's really kind of simple if you look at this thing right here. You think, oh, C, E, F sharp, G. Well, if I take out the F sharp, it's a triad, right? And hopefully you can see that's like the process of elimination. It's a process that you can go through to just like kind of easily figure out a solution. Now this isn't necessarily the solution, it's just a solution, a possibility that you're hearing. And you can check it by looking down at the music here and think like, okay, cool. If we took that F sharp out and we'll circle it, and we'll talk more about this as we get our other dissonances in, but that's actually how we're going to show them. We'll circle them to show that it is a dissonance. You circle it down there and say, okay, cool, the F sharp here is a dissonance. What is this chord then in the key of G? And if it makes sense, like it's literally a chord, then you're probably on the right track. You're probably close to what the thing actually is. So if you take that F sharp out, you get C sharp, or C, E, and G. The E is in the bass. C in the key of G is 4. So that's a 4 with the E in the bass, 6. And that makes sense, right? 1 moving to 4, 6, sure. We haven't part written that yet, but it's like pretty logical, right? It's not like 1 to 7 augmented 4, 3 or something bizarre, right? It's just 1 to 4, cool. Pull the F sharp out. The F sharp then, as we're going to see, is another passing tone. And again, that shouldn't look too unfamiliar to you because again, if you imagine these are second species counterpoint, right? This is literally second species counterpoint, right? That's a sixth. That was a passing motion up that resolves down to a third. And that's why we study that before we start talking about it in the context of larger analysis like this. Okay, so for the rest of this video, we'll just talk about the passing tone, and then we'll split off and do some other ones. The passing tone, it is second species counterpoint. It's dissonance, it's a first by step and left by step in the same direction. And this is what you've been doing up to this point, right? That was a ninth there, it created a dissonance above that C and it resolves up to a sixth. Well, in context, right, in actual music, this is what you get. And there is the dissonance, just like we saw on the other slide, right? There is another passing tone. And that's how we show it. We circle it to show you and your person who's analyzing it that it is not part of the chord, right? And if you look over here, all I've done is written out the Bach over there, but without the passing tones. And you get this thing that you guys could have been able to do up to this point very easily, right? It's 1, it's 4, 6, that's 1, and that's 5. And then check this out, right? If you pull out the dissonances, Bach writes parallel fifths, which is like, oh no, right? He's not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to do that. Why is Bach allowed to do that? We'll check it out. Here's the parallel fifths, right? Here's the A and the D, the E and the B. He gets around it by throwing in this embellishment, which is very clever. And if you guys did this on your homework, I would write very clever and put a little like face like that. It's not necessarily great. I bet if Bach was alive and you just asked him, he might say like, yeah, it's not a great example. But it is a way to break up the parallel fifths, which is kind of cool. Okay, so dissonance, just thinking about these things down here and then we'll break up this video. Dissonance is often an embellishment. This is why we call them embellishing tones, right? It's just adding spice. These things here are just adding something to it. This music over here, if you wrote that, which is without the dissonance, it's totally fine. This music is way more interesting. If you're having trouble determining if something is dissonant, you need to ask yourself, is the thing significant? Is it on a strong beat? And does it sound significant? What I mean by that is, if you go and look at this, right? Just like, this is where we talked about previously, is that this note here just doesn't look as important as the other ones, right? This is like literally a quarter note. That's a quarter note and that's a quarter note. It's like just empirically less important because it's half the length. It's also, as I said down there, it's not on a strong beat. It's on a weak beat, or it's on the and of 4 here. And then, does it sound significant? Again, I'm sorry I can't play this for you right now, but if you go and play this, I think what you're going to hear is that this sounds cool, sounds interesting, but if you take it away, the music is still fundamentally the same. It's not as interesting or cool, but it still works. And that's like the core concept of what dissonance does, right? That it allows the consonants to kind of, I don't know, shine better. It adds, if you think of the consonants as like a sweet flavor, the dissonance is some sour, some salt or something like that, some bitterness that makes the sweetness sound more sweet, right? And or taste more sweet in this metaphor, I suppose. And that's the whole point. Again, until about 1880 or 1900 or so, when things get a little bit different, and the kind of paradigm shifts, and dissonance becomes more free, and it creates a very different, world in which we're going to listen and think about music. Okay, so next video we'll keep going with more dissonance styles and different forms of dissonance.